It's that he answered his own phone and that he called me back personally when he didn't even know who I was. I was a human being to him. My dignity mattered enough that he treated me in a way that...
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is Marilyn Gist. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Marilyn. 1, she is a recognized expert who augments direct leadership experience in business with deep academic credentials. She has served as professor of management and executive director of university leadership programs. 2, she has studied why leader humility is the essential foundation of all healthy organizations and validated her work with interviews of prominent CEOs of companies including the Mayo Clinic, Ford, Starbucks, and Costco. And what about her best-selling book, The Extraordinary Power of Leader Humility? Well, Marshall Goldsmith calls it a must-read for every leader. It's been featured in Forbes and Quartz, and Marilyn's ideas on leader humility have appeared in The Hill, CEO World, Cyrus S.M. Wharton Radio, and numerous podcasts, and now she can add Your Intended Message to that list. And Ken Blanchard, perhaps you remember him, author of The 1 Minute Manager. He says this inspiring book belongs on the desk of every CEO and politician in America. Marilyn Gist, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thank you so much, George. It is a delight to be here. I have enjoyed Your Intended Message on many occasions, and I'm just excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm thrilled to be talking with you about a topic that I believe we don't address often enough, and that's about leadership humility, because often when we talk about leadership, we talk about, building up their confidence and their skills and their command and all that kind of strong look and feel, and humility sounds like just the opposite.
Well, it really isn't. I think you could say it's a balancer. So we have this notion that leaders should be confident, and I would fully agree with that. They have to make some tough decisions. They need to show some belief in the direction they're setting if others are to follow them, and to feel good about that. But the definition of humility that I'm offering here is a tendency to feel and display deep regard for others' dignity. And dignity is simply our sense of our own self-worth. And everybody has that and needs that. And when leaders support that with all of the different groups of people they deal with, they gain much more support. So you can be strong and confident and still behave in ways that support other people's dignity. Those are not incompatible ideas.
And how would we recognize a leader who is coming from a place of humility?
Well, in the book, I talk about 6 keys. There are specific behaviors, and we can come back to that a little later if you like. But I think it helps to recognize that everyone looks at a leader, watches a leader, evaluates what a leader is saying and doing. And when they're watching, they have 3 questions in mind. Who are you? What are you like as a character, as a person? Where are we going? What is it you're asking me to do? And do you see me? Do you see me as a human being with my own wants and my own needs? Or am I just a cog in the wheel to get your own work done and maybe advance your own standing or career? So leaders with humility really balance their own agenda, their own goals, if you will, with what it is that is going to support the sense of self-worth that others have. And as I said, there are a number of specific behaviors that I've talked about in the book that show that to other people.
Well, Marilyn, stop teasing us and tell us what those behaviors are.
Okay, well, let's start with the question of who are you, the character piece. Leaders who have a balanced ego, and you touched on that a little bit in your first question, this idea that leaders should be strong, but some leaders tip toward arrogance. It's really all about them. They strut around, they want to convince everybody else that they are superior. Well, that's very damaging to other people's dignity, because we like to feel that we're worth something too, right? And if you as a leader are coming across in ways that say that I am inferior to you, then you're damaging my dignity. So not straying toward arrogance, at the other side, not straying toward meekness or reluctance to take charge and to make those tough decisions. So having that balanced ego of confidence is one piece of this. Another one is what I call robust integrity. So leaders in terms of the character piece, the who you are piece, really need to walk the talk. They need to not only say certain things, but their own behavior should be above reproach. The way in which they make promises or indicate they're going to back things with resources are things that they need to follow through with. So people are watching for what kind of integrity do you have? Can I trust you so that, I know your word is good? So that's a couple of them. Yeah, that's just on the character piece, the who you are.
And who you are. And when we look at leaders, I remember from my own experience when I worked with different companies, and the first thing we're all looking at the leader and saying, okay, well, what do you think about, and it was often a him, what do you think about him or her? And do they really mean what they say? Can we trust them?
Right.
How much do I reveal about myself? Is it safe to
Right.
expose ourselves to this person?
Right. Absolutely. So the who are you question is top of mind. I think it's the first thing most people want to know when they're introduced to a new boss, when a politician wins a new election. We want to know, okay, we've known the name, we've seen the blurb ahead of time, but now let's really watch and get a sense of who that person is. Then the next thing we want to know is, where are you taking us? Where are you asking us to go? Is this someplace I want to go? And so I talk about two sets of behaviors, one being compelling vision, which is setting a direction that is good for most constituents. When you have something in what you're asking people to do that serves a broader common good or advances the interests of most of the constituent groups you have, then it's a compelling vision. If it's only your agenda, or if it's advancing the interests of one group, but to a strong disadvantage of another group, then you're going to create tension. You're not going to have full followership and full support. And what we see most of the time, whether in organizations or in government at the local or national level, is that the constituent groups who are ignored and are left out generally will find ways over time to come back and demand even more, or may work to take that leader down. So you want a compelling vision that really is serving broad-based interests. That's what makes it compelling. And then the other set of behaviors with that is ethical strategies, really going about achieving those goals in ways that don't cut corners, don't violate the law or ethics, that retain that honesty in dealing with people. Most people don't want to work for leaders that are asking them to do what's wrong. I once, when I was fairly young in my career, worked for a vice president who was asking me to do something. We were doing a government contract business. This was an industry. And he wanted me to do something that was not only irregular, but illegal. And I mentioned that to him because I was the one who would have to sign this offer and go to jail if it were, if it came back to haunt us. And so I told him, this isn't right. This is actually illegal. And he turned around and said, don't forget who's paying your check these days. Well, that is asking someone to really do something unethical, or in this case, illegal. I was young. I didn't know how to handle that directly in conversation the way I would now. But I went back feeling really uncomfortable. I found ways of just letting it lapse so that I didn't do what he was asking and wouldn't get us in trouble. And then I left the organization within 6 months. So I think there are real costs for leaders in terms of demoralizing people, in terms of attrition, when they violate ethical standards. It goes against my sense of self-worth to be asked to do something that's unethical or illegal.
Now, when I remember, that whole thing about the ethics of the leader and the organization itself, I remember at one time some organizations went through these studies where they're trying to define their values, their corporate values.
Right.
And I remember thinking, well, this is silly. If we want to know what our values are, just look at how we make decisions.
Absolutely. And, in some of my consulting work, I've worked with numerous groups who have said some version of, well, we have this mission and value statement on the wall and everyone knows that's malarkey. I mean, that, companies will say things that sound good, but the people in the organization know whether they walk that talk or not. And unfortunately, in many cases, they do not walk the talk. The leadership does not walk the talk. And people feel what happens, George, is they're only partially engaged at that point. They'll come in, they'll punch a clock, so to speak. They'll do what they have to do, but they're not going to give their full creativity, their full energy. They're not going to go above and beyond the call of duty. They're not going to give you their best creativity, solve the most problems that they can, because they feel you're not worth it, frankly. And an awful lot of, getting an organization to be healthy and thriving and really getting the best results comes down to, are people passionate about the leader they work for? Do they really admire that leader, as a human being? And when they do, what you get is very high engagement and a large proportion of people who'll just go to the mat for that leader. They'll give it everything they have.
Now, it's interesting. I'm wondering, Marilyn, have you ever had to have a discussion with a leader and saying, where the leaders push them back on these, and they're saying, well, I've got a business to run, and you don't understand how things are done in this industry. We just can't be all nicey nice.
Yes, and sometimes you run into people who aren't going to buy the message no matter what you do. And, I'm not going to be able to change everyone. Most people, though, when you're able to present the data and explain it as clearly as I do, really begin to understand it. They can recognize, I mentioned in the book, the Gallup organization has been running surveys every year, and it's a global survey, but they also slice it for the domestic market in the US. And for years, we have had employee engagement levels that rise as high as 35, 36%. That's the top, meaning, and their definition really, if you penetrate that, are employees who are committed to their jobs, who are interested in it, who are willing to do everything they can. That's only a third of them. So basically 2/3 of the people that you have working for you are most likely giving you only a part of their capability. And when you look at the opportunity cost, the amount of work that's not being done, the productivity that's lost by having 2/3 of your people only partly engaged or fully disengaged, waiting to find another job, That's huge. And most leaders begin to look at that and say, yeah, if I could reclaim even 20% more, think how much more effective we can be at achieving the goals. So I do understand what we're trying to do. I do know how your business is, how your industry is. What I'm saying is that you get work done through other people. You don't do it by yourself. And if you want to get the most out of people, if you really want great results and thriving organizations, we have data that show that leader humility is the way to go. It definitely drives up engagement, it reduces turnover costs, and it really gives you great results.
Lack of engagement and turnover costs must be a significant cost to business, and will probably tend to be an even greater cost as we go through this next period, because I'm reading that people are starting to get unhappy with their jobs, and they're not even going to find other jobs. They're actually just quitting.
Yes, unfortunately, that's a sad commentary on what people felt about the workplace before the pandemic, that it's taken a pandemic in some ways to have people realize that it just isn't worth it to go back to the kind of work they had before. And in a way, George, this plays into kind of the third question that I said everybody has of their leader, which is, do you see me? Do you see me as a human being? And unfortunately, some companies, some leaders, some industries have really not supported the dignity of the work and the worker in ways that now make workers want to go back. And that's certainly not universal, but we've had this whole work from home year and a half in knowledge-based industries. And employees in those industries are now saying, we showed you we could do this. We came through for you when the world had to stop. We have, worked our 8-10 hours a day from home while juggling kids who also were out of school, and where we didn't have the office set up and we had to use our own computers or whatever. Now that things are opening up again, hey, wait a minute, maybe we want some of this flexibility. Maybe we want a flexible work schedule, or maybe we want, other kinds of accommodations before we go back. In some cases, we're seeing salary demands and salary increases, especially from lower wage employees who have had to work 2 and 3 jobs in order to pay, their bills, for example. And we are seeing increases in salaries because companies need workers, and workers have said, I'm not going back. I'm just not going to go back and work as hard as you're asking for the wages you're paying. So these kinds of things tap into that "do you see me" question. And I talk about 2 really key sets of behaviors that leaders need to display in order to support others' dignity on these 2 questions, or on this question. So one of those sets of behaviors is inclusion. And we hear a lot of talk about inclusion in the realm of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it certainly does apply to that, but I'm using it far broader than that. So leaders have different constituent groups. If it's a business leader, you have your customers, certainly your employees, you have your board, you have certain regulators, you have your supply chain and your vendors, and on it goes. Well, each of those groups has certain interests. And when you're making strategic decisions, they often have an impact on most of those groups, or certainly more than one. And so the inclusion I'm talking about is, are you figuratively picking up the phone and talking to those groups, to all of those groups of people? Are you finding out what their thoughts are about the options you have, the direction you're planning to go? How is it going to impact them? And are you doing your best as you're making decisions and setting direction to accommodate, or at least try to work in the needs that those different groups have? So I mention this because our conversation about coming out of the pandemic and, going back to the office, this is an inclusion bit. Companies that think we can simply flip the switch, bring everybody back, business as usual, are looking at it through their own lens and are not including, say, the employee group, who very much has had, they've had the back of the company for the last year and a half. They've done the work, and now they're saying, include us, look at our needs, look at what flexibilities we're now asking for, because we have learned to work a different way. And maybe we don't want to go back to what we had before because of commute times, daycare, whatever. So generous inclusion means really tapping into the needs of all of those stakeholder groups. And then the final set of behavior I talk about in the book is developmental focus. And we're seeing this a lot post-pandemic too, as an issue surfacing when people are not going back to work, they're quitting or whatever. Are you looking at a person's long-term interests, or are you only focused on the job you want them to do today? Now, clearly, as a leader, you have the need for them to do the job today. But how often do employees come to you, for example, and say, I've been here for X period of time, year, 2 years, 2 months, and I'm interested in one day being CEO. I want your job, or I'm interested in moving into this department or picking up those set of skills. How do you respond to that? As a leader, if you're supporting other people's dignity, you need to embrace their humanness in having long-term interests. And it doesn't mean that you're responsible for giving them everything they want, but to even allow the conversation to listen thoughtfully and say, I hear you. I don't have anything immediately, but let me think about it. And then as you're doing your thinking, is there an opportunity to give an assignment that might help build that person's skills in the direction they want to go? Or is there an opportunity to make a referral for a customer that is looking for more business in your company? That might be a way of supporting their longer term interests. So there are lots of opportunities that leaders have to show, I care about you not only doing what I'm asking you today, but I do see you as a full person. And I do understand that you have longer term interests too, George. And so let's see what I can offer you going forward. And it may just be making some connections, select assignments. At the other extreme, maybe it's a promotion downstream.
None of that sounds complicated or beyond the ability of any leader to do that. And yet some leaders might push back. The leaders who you see succeeding in this use of humility and demonstrating these behaviors, what's different about them? What, other than following these behaviors, what's really different about them?
I think what's different is that to a person, they recognize the humanity in the people who are working around them and all of their constituent groups. So some leaders seem to be very, very task focused, George. It's about what are the goals? How do we get to the goals? What are the metrics? How do we drive to that? And they almost view people as functionaries. You're here to do a job, just stay straight, keep your nose clean, do what I tell you to do, and we'll get there. The leaders who display humility have a somewhat clearly differentiated approach, which is, hi, George, it's nice to meet you. Let's spend, maybe it's 5 minutes up front, 10 minutes, just chatting, getting to know each other a little bit. And then day by day, as we interact, I'm treating you more as a human being because I'm mindful that you're human and you have a sense of self-worth. And so all of these 6 sets of behaviors are not difficult, but they tend to come more naturally for leaders who are anchored in humility. And in the book, of course, I interviewed and discussed the views of a dozen really prominent CEOs or CEOs of prominent companies who all get it and generated thriving organizations great results, and in some cases huge turnarounds that they brought about very quickly.
Leaders who succeed must see people as people, and when you were talking about the arrogance, and I wrote down the words inferior and superior, and I believe that, people who demonstrate arrogance have this concept of there are inferior people and there are superior people, and therefore we're not equal, which if someone demonstrates that or thinks that, they don't have a chance at this at all.
They don't, not as a leader, because they'll lose the hearts and minds of people who have been handled in a way that says they're inferior. We are all different and unique, George, as people. You as a leader may have more experience on the job than I have. Perhaps you have more education. You certainly have more status and standing in the organization. Your salary is probably higher. You may have a bigger home or whatever. But, I as a human being have my attributes too, and I probably exceed you in some other areas. And so as a leader, it's not about getting out the yardstick and measuring, but it's very much realizing that a human being who may not be as high up on some criteria, like say education or job experience, is nonetheless as valuable a human being as I am. And if you get rid of that notion of superiority and you treat everybody from the gardener and custodian through, the senior management and board, if you treat all of them as if their self-worth matters, then you just get so much greater admiration, respect, liking, and followership. People will just go to the mat for you. And part of that is it's so uncommon. It's unfortunate, but it's so uncommon for leaders to do that.
I'm thinking of the phrase, do you know who I am? I'm so-and-so. I'm the boss. I'm the one who signed your check. And I suppose if you see that behavior in your boss, run fast away.
Right. Right. I really think so. One of the people I interviewed in the book at the time, Orlando Ashford, was president of Holland America. And he made a comment that he said, I usually, he was basically talking about how he doesn't like to use status in his initial introduction. So he said, when people ask, who I am and where I work or what I do, I'll usually say I work for Holland America. And then he said, if they ask again, well, what do you do there? He'll say, I'm in management. And then if they say, well, like what job? Then he'll say, I'm CEO, but I usually won't start there. And I thought it was such a nice contrast with what you're saying about, do you know who I am? His approach was, it's not important for everybody to know who I am. The people in the company know my name. They know who the head of the organization is. And if I walk down the hall and they don't know me initially, within a few weeks, everybody's going to know, because people will whisper, oh, that's so-and-so. That's the head of the organization. So you don't need to wear it on your chest. They'll find out. And if you're, somewhere else, most of the time, you don't need to lead with who you are. You really should lead with trying to find out who everybody else is and get to know them. So I'm not saying that there aren't times in business. Certainly, if you have a key role in a negotiation or you're giving a keynote talk, you want people to know your title and who you are. But as a matter of just displaying your ego to lean toward, I want everybody to know who I am, is a little bit on the arrogant side.
It sounds like leaders need to be far better communicators, especially at listening.
Yes. And I think, this gets to your intended message, George. If what you want to do is to communicate a direction and you want people to follow them, you'll be much more successful rather than emphasizing your own greatness, at listening to who they are, what they can do, what their interests are, and finding ways to enable and support that, both because it's the right thing to do, but because by supporting and building your team, you get greater competence applied to the goals that you have anyway. So yes, leaders do need to get better at communicating, and particularly at making sure that they're displaying humility in the messages that they communicate, because otherwise people just turn off.
I remember many years ago when I worked for a large corporation that I had the opportunity to meet the CEO, and I thought, oh, he's talking to me, little me, and we talked. He asked where it's from, and at the time I lived in a small town outside of the big city. And the interesting thing is, every time that he saw me, he would always mention the small town. He remembered.
He remembered.
I thought, wow, like that, all the things he's got to remember, and he remembers me.
Right.
That made a big impact on me.
Yes. And it's the small things like that. And that came through in a number of my interviews as well. CEOs who remembered the names of somebody's children, who, Sally Jewell, when she was Secretary, U.S. Department of Interior, and the guard in the building who said, they were amazed because, she instead of taking a car, she rode the subway, 2 suitcases in tow, tennis shoes for her first day in the office. She comes in like that, stops, drops the suitcases, introduces herself to everybody. They'd never seen this before. And then they said, "And do you know what? It's not just that." But within the next 2 weeks, she knew not only all of us, she knew the names of everybody's spouse, everybody's children. She came down to the front of the lobby every morning to greet people coming into the building. And she would pause and ask, "How is so-and-so, your grandchild or your child or whatever." So those small things just had such a huge impact on the energy level of the people working for her, and wanting them to do everything they could to make this organization shine. Just amazing how those small things. I mentioned a small story, and I know I've told this 100 times over the years, of my first encounter with Jim Senegal when he was CEO of Costco. Had not met him, needed a speaker on short notice for a program I had just taken over. And somebody, suggested a few names to call. And I thought, well, I know he's way too busy, but it'd be nice if we could get, the head of Costco to come talk with us. And I dialed his office and waited for the receptionist to answer. And, the phone rang a couple of times, and he picked it up and said, "Senegal." And I was just floored. I mean, I don't know CEOs of multinational organizations who answer their own phone. So I'm stammering, "Oh, Mr. Senegal, I'm so-and-so, you don't know me, but, I'd like you to come and maybe talk to this program." And, he's not what I would call a warm, fuzzy person. He's very brusque and brisk, but he said, "What's your name again?" I said, "Marilyn Gist." "I'll need to call you back. What's your number?" I have to check my calendar. Gave him my number. And when I got off the phone, I just thought, oh my gosh, I've talked to the head of Costco. This is amazing. I know he's too busy. He's going to just hand this off to his assistant to call me back and say he's too busy. And 10 minutes later, the phone rang. I picked it up. He goes, "Marilyn, this is Jim Senegal. That date works. Where do you want me? What time, should I be there?" I was just floored. I mean, he not only answered it the first time, his integrity. He was telling the truth when he said, "I need to check my calendar and I'll call you back." And then, he could have turned me down and I'd have still been in heaven, but it happened that he said he was available and he came to talk. But the thing that has stayed in my mind all these years, George, is not that he came to talk. It's that he answered his own phone and that he called me back personally when he didn't even know who I was. I was a human being to him. My dignity mattered enough that he treated me in a way that supported my sense of self-worth. Now, years later, I was introducing Senegal for a program, and I told that story, and he turned to me and he said, well, I don't always answer my own phone, Marilyn, but if I'm sitting there and it rings and I'm free, I will. Well, for every time he answers it, you can bet there's probably 100 people who tell that story. So that's the kind of thing that spreads through an organization. It's almost like a culture forms around this person who was known for having no reserved parking place, known for being seen to pick up paper off the floor, known for answering his own phone on occasion. I mean, those are the kinds of things that say this is a leader with humility who, by the way, built this humongous company, multinational company, without investing in advertising. I mean, didn't have to, just word of mouth. Now they got plenty of press, but press is different than direct advertising. Costco doesn't advertise.
That's right. I've never seen an ad from them.
Yeah.
Marilyn, for people who'd like to know more about your book, The Extraordinary Power of Leader Humility, it's available on Amazon, of course, and other major stores, including Barnes and Noble. Barnes and Noble. I stumbled over that. Don't know why. You have some resources on your website. Let's tell people about them. First, the assessment test. What will that help people do?
So this is an opportunity in private to assess your own competence in the area of humility. So you can simply log in. I know, George, you're putting it in the show notes, but you can log into the test through there. There's a small fee. And when you complete the test, it only takes 5 to 10 minutes, depending on which version of it, shorter or longer, you want. And it will instantly score it and give you a download report of your results on leader humility. The short version just does the 6 keys to leader humility. You get about a 12-page report. The longer version picks up 4 additional scales that are very important. So you get about a 20-page report from that. So that's very helpful. It gives you a way to benchmark. It's a supplement to the book. If you're interested in developing your skills, it'll tell you where you stand now. And if you're great, fine. If you need work, it'll very clearly help you identify which of those areas to build skills in.
Got it. So stop wondering if you passed the humility test. Here's a chance to find out for sure. Maybe you're better than you are. Maybe you're not as good as you are, but let's find out. Take that test at her site. That's MarilynGist.com. And that particular assessment, the link is in the description below, but it's set /forwards leader humility assessment tools with dashes between them.
Right.
Marilyn, you also run a master class on leader humility, the essence of working together. People can find information about that master class. The next one, they can also find that information on your website. And again, that's MarilynGist.com. And you'll find that link down below in the description. Marilyn, in wrapping up, if you could sit down with a new leader who's just been promoted into a senior position, and if you could give them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice of how to display humility, how to put it to work so that it works for them and it works for the team, what would be those 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice you'd offer them?
The first thing I would say is that leaders are selected generally because of their own outstanding performance and their drive to get results done. And the new position they're in, they need to realize it's time to shift gears. And that shift has to be to leveraging other people to get the work done. You can't do it yourself. So it's all about how well can you create a container that others can thrive in. And that means that leading is a relationship. And so central to the relationship, if you understand that, is this idea of humility, that the more you can support the sense of self-worth that other people have, not your own ego, but if you can help other people feel good about their own sense of self-worth, their own dignity, the more energized and hardworking they're going to become. So take opportunities to thank them and appreciate them for what they do. Take all of the opportunities you have to compliment them on something they do well or on skill sets that they have. Take a little bit of time to get to know something about them personally. I mean, not being intrusive, but if they're married and they mention a spouse, make the effort to remember that person's name. Or if they've got kids, make an effort to remember that, and occasionally ask how they're doing and listen to that. So letting them know you see them as a person. So again, you're creating this container and working through people to get the work done. And your job as a leader then is to make that container wholesome and to support all of the people in it.
Make that container wholesome and support all the people in it. I like the sound of that. My guest today is Marilyn Gist, reminding you that humility is really just simply respecting other people's dignity.
If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.